I think logistically, shipping from my perspective, product coming into Canada is also a challenge. We're not able to get delivery dates for material. A lot of it's sitting in containers, waiting to be offloaded because, again, a lack of general labor and a bottleneck in shipping. Shipping costs have gone up. We used to ship for $5,000 a container, and it's about $25,000 now after insurance and coverages you get put on it. So all of this leads to longer schedules and more expensive bidding that we're seeing in the commercial and in the residential markets. There's some companies take advantage. Construction's a commodity, so if you've got bandwidth and somebody's desperate to get a heating job done, well, then you're going to pay more at some point. That's really where we are right now. There's an abundance of work, I'll put it that way. There's no shortage of work. We're seeing in all industries, ICI and residential, there's lots of work. There's lots of capacity there for everybody. It's just getting the work done that's the biggest challenge.
I recently seen that Ottawa had the most pool permit applications in the province of Ontario. So I think most pool companies right now, from what I've heard, are already reaching out into 2023 in different sectors. But obviously, from a construction standpoint, that's affecting a lot of things. Jeff, if I may, I'm going to flip over to you to sort of comment on all of the challenges. I've heard cost, which when money comes into play, there's obviously a lot of opportunity for dispute. How are you seeing the impacts in the construction industry in the legal side of the world?
Thanks, Matthew, and thanks everyone for being here. The sort of industry trends that I was going to discuss are essentially the same as Daryl. What I'm finding in my practice, being mostly a litigation practice, is that with the shortages of both materials and labor, suppliers and subcontractors or trades are the parties right now in the construction pyramid with leverage. And I'm seeing a large part with my owner clients or my developer clients who may have a skilled trade ask for an increase in their contract price, or a supplier ask for an increase, especially in lumber in the last year, ask for an increase in price in their contract. And then my client's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because if they say yes, they're paying potentially more than they feel they have to. And if they say no, then the supplier or the trade is just going to go down the street to the next development and probably get that price from somebody else. So in the legal side of things, I've spent a lot of time in the past year trying to come up with creative ways with my clients of amending their contracts to take into account price increases and price decreases. Obviously, depending on which side of the contract you're on, you're going to be more in favor of one over the other. We've done a number of different sort of incentive programs where there's bonuses available if you complete so many lots within so many days, or if you supply your materials strictly in accordance with the schedule that's set out in the contract. And then there could be penalties as a result if you don't. That's sort of on the solicitor side or the contract negotiation side. In terms of litigation, I've been practicing around 7 or 8 years now, and I've noticed that in the last year and a half, well, during the pandemic anyway, the number of construction liens that I've been asked to either register or defend has quadrupled. What I see is that because of the shortage of skilled trades and supplier and materials like Daryl was mentioning, I'm seeing a lot of sort of spin-off corporations form from larger trades, where maybe a site foreman goes up and sets up his own shop. And in a lot of these cases, they're pretty fly-by-night operations, usually set up on 24 hours notice under a new name. They probably don't have their corporate records and, importantly for this meeting today, their insurance set up. And that it's high risk for a lot of owners and developers. You may, in many cases, my clients see the opportunity. Maybe they charge a little bit less, and maybe they're willing to work crazy hours to get a project done. But if and when things go sour, these new operations generally are pretty judgment proof. They probably don't have any much significant assets. The money's probably coming in on contract payday, and it's probably going out to their workers and whoever else the following day. And again, in many cases, don't have the necessary insurance either, maybe that their contract even requires. And that's why the biggest thing I'm pushing right now is get labor and material and performance bonds as much as you can. And if your contract says that somebody's supposed to provide certain insurance policies, to follow up on it, have somebody responsible in your enterprise for following up on these things and making sure that the requirements are met, because it would save a lot of headache down the road.
Jeff, well, without giving away the plot for the whole conversation today, Derek, I want to flip it over to you, because everything that Daryl and Jeff have mentioned has had an impact on the insurance industry as a whole, obviously, but it's probably not as recent. It's probably started, 3-4 years ago as the results of the industry and everything got there from a soft market and a hard market, and maybe chat on what that means and how some of the challenges that these industries have faced over the last little bit will sort of has been affected in COVID.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt, and thanks again for the opportunity. It's funny, the comments that Daryl made earlier, and we had an opportunity to connect about a week ago, and I found it humorous because everything that Daryl sees, I see it sort of. I'm the last guy on the phone call, sort of thing, in securing the insurance. So the way Daryl articulated, it's exactly what I'm seeing. But again, it's right at the end of things. So, but to your point, Matt. The insurance industry goes through what we call soft and hard market cycles. We're currently in what we call a hard market cycle. So if we go back 5 or 6 years ago, the marketplace had a tremendous amount of capacity, meaning there was a lot of shareholder investment in insurers. There was a lot of capacity that insurers had to take on projects, take on new clients. With that comes, a level of hyper competition. So the prices are very aggressive. The industry in aggregate, when you get that hyper level of competition, and then all of a sudden you get other market influences, investment returns, bond markets, and all those sorts of things, it starts to affect the performance of the insurers. So the insurance marketplace. So what we've seen in the past, I'd say going back about 3 or 4 years ago, the returns that the insurers were producing for their shareholders just wasn't sufficient. It was just too many years of hyper competition. So then we enter into what we're calling a hard market cycle. So within that hard market cycle, we see capacity dry up a little bit. Some of the insurers that would put capacity forward are a little less apt, or they're putting less amounts forward. And prices start to go up, premiums start to go up as the expectations of the shareholders or that the returns are improving. So we've been kind of in that cycle a little bit for about 3 years. The construction industry has been an interesting one, and I'll just speak very briefly to what I've experienced with the Avivas. That if I step back maybe 8 years ago, we were competing, and everyone was kind of getting a share of the pie as far as the insurers go. And then we found that the prices were getting to a point for us that it was just the prices were too low, the premiums charged were too low, and it didn't make sense for us to get involved in certain projects because we didn't feel that we could get a return on investment. So what we've seen more recently is, again, those carriers have backed out a little bit. We seem to be writing a good bit of business now because we feel that the prices are sustainable on a go-forward basis. But there's some notable carriers in Canada that have just said, you know what, we're not writing right now. And again, not put too much forward. We'll continue that discussion on what the outlook looks like for the marketplace. But again, we're kind of on the back of 3 challenging years, and we'll see as we go forward. And again, maybe I'll come into that a little bit later.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Daryl, I wanted to swing back to your side. You touched on the shortage of materials, and have you found that the bigger players have the ability to have either put in orders and they've been able to sustain a level of commitment that some of the smaller players haven't? Has the sub trades been able to keep up with some of the work? And then that'll sort of dive into the conversation about the labor shortages that I know the industry as a whole is experiencing.
Yeah, so some of the track builders in residential, the larger ones, basically have taken ownership of the supply chain for trusses and floor joists, etc., as well as subcontractors, particularly formwork contractors that have always been a challenge to manage. Sometimes they'll pull a crew off and the crew will go and do another smaller job, or a job that a smaller builder would be doing. And what we're seeing is the minute that they send somebody off, they're getting a lawyer's letter from different law firms to say that if they're not back, they're going to be sued. They have to deliver so many units a month. We went through a terrible drought. There was no inventory of homes, and this is what drove our market up, is that there was a very short availability of stock. And only until recently, the larger builders have had some stuff that they could actually sell right away. But we're seeing that. If you call a truss company today and ask for a price on trusses, they'll tell you that they're not supplying trusses until next year. So we're not even looking at taking orders. And that's because some of the larger builders have taken 100% allocation of what they're going to produce. Or a building group, building supply group, Aronas or Home Depots or whatever their associations are, have allocated 100% production to go through that. So they control the flow, as we say. So that's a real challenge. We are seeing that a lot of companies are not taking that into account when they bid. And they'll either make up their own numbers because they can't get numbers, but then they can't deliver if they're successful on their job. So what we're doing now a lot more is a lot more front-end research into the project on the availability of material so that we can raise those questions during addendums where all the bidders are present. So, we can tell the owners, look, you just can't get this stuff right now. Everybody here agree? And then that starts to work everybody as a team to find a solution. We're also seeing in the supply chain, more than I've ever seen before, prepaying for product. So if you want trusses, if you want siding, if you want whatever, you're going to be prepaying for that product, even if it's a 6, 10, 15 weeks out. So looking at that and understanding it corporately, you need the financial resources to meet the expectations of the client, because you're not going to get paid for 30 days after your 30 days work, and you're going to be out a considerable amount of money on the short term. And this is where a lot of companies feel that they can survive into that mode. But if you don't look financially at getting through the first 3 months of a project, you're going to be talking to Derek or Jeffrey at some point in time.
And Derek, maybe I'll sort of swing it back to you to say, he raised a lot of issues there that we know from a historical standpoint, whether it's extension of builders' risk policies, payment up front to who owns the materials going into builders' risks, all those things. Maybe you want to touch on some of those issues and how that's affected the insurance policy as a whole and the marketplace and the difficulties of then, from our standpoint on the broker side, but also the insurance companies to secure appropriate levels of coverage for these big projects.
Yeah. So this isn't a new issue as far as projects being delayed and having to get extensions, but we're seeing it much more than we ever have. And one thing I've seen recently where an insurer wouldn't continue on a certain project, it was just extended to such an extensive level that they excused themselves. So I've just never seen that before. So there's some uniquenesses happening in the industry. Fortunately, other than that isolated area, that continuation of coverage is there. When the pandemic, if I can step back a little bit, when the pandemic first, occurred in March of 2020, at that time, there was just a tremendous amount of uncertainty. And from the carrier side, the insurer side, we all discussed it. And what do we do with projects that are sitting? How do we move forward? Fortunately, that was a very short time period that construction sites, the unknown of what was going to happen. I think we were a few weeks kind of thing. And then the government came to support and open up job sites. So we were prepared to hold cover on that time period of downtime. But again, ultimately, we see it an awful lot. The market continues to support, but it does add costs, as Daryl was saying, and unexpected costs. So the way builders' risks are produced from a pricing standpoint is you have the foresight of what the project length is going to be, and that's how you establish the pricing. As you get near the end of the project and the majority of the values, the majority of the exposure from an insurance assessment standpoint is significant, that continuation of cost, or that cost for the extension, can be very pricey. And for the insurer, we have line of sight that is the highest point of exposure for us. So it's challenging for sure, but fortunately there's good market stability there for those extensions. But unfortunately, as Daryl said, that's cost that transfers back to the project owner, and the risk to the general contractor.
Jeff, Daryl mentioned the addendums to the contract. We have a question in here from using a force majeure to renegotiate contracts during these unprecedented times. How legal is this? I signed a contract. To me, that's binding, but obviously there's a lot of interpretation within the court system. Things I know from a residential standpoint have always been fairly weighted towards the contractor. I've heard of many situations where landscapers or companies are just flat out walking away from jobs and that are signed, have deposits, whatever the case may be. What are some of the legalities and some of the pitfalls that are happening right now that you're seeing?
Well, in terms of force majeure clauses, I think to give a very lawyerly answer, it depends on what the clause in the contract says.
Very lawyerly of you, yes.
Yeah. I think, and that supposes that you have a force majeure clause in your contract to begin with, because if you don't, the concept doesn't apply. And the two biggest things that I saw in the last year and a half about force majeure clauses specifically is whether or not a global pandemic is a force majeure event. Some clauses are very specific about what counts. You see the usual insurrection, acts of God sort of thing. You often don't see, or you don't see as much or you do now, but you didn't before, global pandemics. And then the second is how difficult performance of the contract has to be in order to rely on the force majeure clause. If your clause just says more difficult or impractical or even impossible, if the force majeure event simply caused your prices to go up, then there's a good argument to be made that it's not impossible to perform the contract. It's just harder for you. And we had a lot of those disputes on both sides of the coin about how much of a price increase makes a contract impossible. Does that even, is it impractical, what the standard is? So I've seen a decrease in the amount of force majeure arguments in the last 8 months. It was really a spring, summer 2020 kind of discussion. But coming back to your question, yes, a contract says I must build your house by this day. But unfortunately, as Daryl mentioned, if an owner wants to let their contractor walk away, then you're having to restart your tendering process in some way, potentially. Even if you sole source it to somebody, they probably can't start for months, if not years. And so unfortunately, a lot of what I'm seeing is developers, owners sticking with their problematic contractor and in some way reserving their rights later on to come back at the contractor at the end of the project. That always gets into a bit of a tough dance where the contractor doesn't want that hanging over their head for the rest of the project. But on the other hand, the owner may say, well, I can't go another 2 years on this project and let hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars get paid to you without any kind of chance of recovering them down the road. So it's really a risk assessment is what it comes down to at the end of the day.
Daryl, how are you guys dealing with that risk of dealing with your subcontractors and whatever those risks are? How are you guys handling that, and what advice do you have for everyone?
Yeah, well, in a non-performance for a subcontractor that just isn't performing, whether we're in a pandemic or not, you've got to take a look at your best interests, and sometimes it's worth it just to part company with them as soon as you can and replace them with somebody that's going to get the job done. If they're inexperienced, typically people take the best price that comes in on your bid sheet, and that's been the nature of the business forever. And sometimes when you bring in a new person, it's tough. So you either work with that person financially to help them, or you replace them. COVID, the delays on our client side and our construction sides, we use the force majeure clause and it's easy to use that clause with government. It's not so easy to use that cost with a private client. But the government recognized that if we were going to go back to a site, that we would have to have additional precautions in place, which included isolation and sometimes quarantines, 14-day quarantine going into a country, 14 days coming back from that country, the testing. And they were quite open to cover those costs, because to not have the project move forward was going to cost them a lot more than the incremental costs that we had to compensate for COVID. So it's really sitting down, if the client, like a large build where there's multiple tenants, then it's a serious financial commitment to not deliver the building on time and have everybody move into their condo or everybody move into their office space. So the incremental costs are there. Subtrades, we didn't get a lot of additional costing through subtrades because we managed the site so that it was safe and we followed the protocols that we were given. And it really wasn't that onerous on anybody to do that. And we're still doing it today. The rules are very straightforward.
So I'll shift gears on the subtrade contract conversation then. You mentioned it in your opening monologue, Daryl, labor shortages.
Yeah,
they're all over the place. So maybe you want to touch on that and how it's impacted your business, the subs, and what you're seeing from new entrants into the marketplace as well.
Yeah, if you take a look at some of the key where we have licenses that are issued to trade, so there's electricians, plumbers, carpenters, skilled drywall installers, steel studs, steel erectors, all the welding, etc., where you need a certificate, but it's still the same system where you need a sponsor to go in, and so the numbers coming out are very controlled. We need a couple 100,000 new tradespeople. And part of the provincial government waiving the license requirements for new immigrants to come in, I think is going to be helpful. If I have a carpenter that can show me that he's got good carpentry experience and I can put him at a level where he can make a living, then that's great news, because we need them. We need all of them. The trade schools are excellent. Like the kids coming out of the colleges are great, but we see more and more of them headed towards the project management side or the engineering side, because it seems to be more colorful, or that's where a lot of them are put to. We need graduates from both. I need engineering graduates that want to work in the trades, that can read a set of drawings, that are technically skilled. They're perfect. And then if they've got some field experience, it just adds to it. So, but they're very, very hard to get right now.
Yeah. Derek, on that note, we see it all the time, and we run into issues throughout the industry in insurance, whether it's the experience piece, number of companies popping up all over the place saying that they're doing stuff with no experience, or they've worked in different companies, have gone out on their own. Can you comment on the availability of the product, what you're seeing? How easy is it for someone to get a $5 million commercial general liability policy with no experience?
Yeah, great question, Matt. And very much what Daryl's seeing is that prior to the pandemic, it obviously isn't uncommon, a business starting up, and it really comes down to what you can sort of fall back on is the resume. So for a new business starting up, does their resume show that they've had some experience in that given trade? Have they gone to the college? Do they have some experience in another country? So the marketplace, that's very much what we're looking for. When I refer to the marketplace, the insurance marketplace, that's what we're looking for. With COVID, we saw a lot of people that retooled, if you will, in all industries, not just construction. So we saw the industry was a little bit uncomfortable as to where things were going with the pandemic. But again, in short order, there was comfort there, and we move forward. But we get the ask a fair bit. Ultimately, to your point, how available is a $5 million CGL for a drywall contractor, paint contractor, plumbing contractor? They just have to present well, and their broker needs to put them out to the marketplace as although a new business, having good trade experience and having a good business plan in place The other thing I'll quickly note too is that the insurance marketplace has unique, what we call wholesalers. So it's possible that they're not able to buy coverage directly through a general carrier in the industry in Canada, but there are wholesalers where they can pay, a notable premium for their policy, and someone will take a risk on them. So I would say right now the marketplace is in a good position. The insurance marketplace is to help new businesses getting started, but it comes down to a broker presenting them well to the insurance marketplace to maximize the value they get from their premium spend.
Are you seeing, Derek, a segmentation of brokers who are able to do that accurately, to be able to present a risk in the right way, whether it's from their own challenges within a personnel standpoint, their availability of markets, their experience within the lines of business?
Sure. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. From one brokerage to another, there's varying levels of experience, varying levels of insurer availability. Different brokers have different insurance markets that they deal with. So definitely it can vary by brokerage to brokerage.
And Jeff, are you seeing, maybe as we turn our focus to 2022 and an outlook of this is going to keep happening with the sub trades and the labor shortage and people going out on their own, what comments can you give and sort of what advice can you give to people who are going out on their own and to, on the flip side, from the contractor side of things, who are hiring these newbies that deserve a fair shot but need certain things in place?
Yeah, I alluded to it maybe prematurely in my first few comments, but from an owner or general contractor perspective, it's more important than ever to ensure that your trades are insured, both in terms of general liability, but also if you're able to insist on labor and material bonds and performance bonds. With the, as I said earlier, with the prevalence of startup trades and labor, which I agree with Daryl is definitely a good thing in many respects. It's even more important because, as I said, at the end of the day, even if your contract says that your contractor has to get their own insurance policy and they don't, then you're just suing them anyway. So you don't really have that security and that assurance. What I'm seeing a lot of my clients do with these spin-off and new entities is start small. Instead of giving them a contract for 100 lots at once, maybe they'll do a handful and see how that goes and scale up from there. It's lower risk and allows the company and the contractors to sort of grow together. And we even have been putting in incentives in those contracts for bonuses on subsequent contracts. And as I said earlier, again, bonus and incentives within the contract itself, so that everyone keeps has an incentive to get the project done on price and on time.
Daryl, is that something from your side of things that you're willing to do? Is that something you're seeing more and more that you're going up against in a bidding process? And then it's sort of a follow-up on that. You mentioned it a little bit earlier, but the effectiveness of the communication and timelines and setting expectations with your clients. Can you touch on that?
Sure. When we look at a job at the very beginning, we do a risk assessment, and the risk assessment is based on what is the contract format? Is it a CCDC, or is it one that's been developed by a developer or a client? Because that's where the pitfalls, that's where the danger lies in a lot of cases. I think if you're coming out and you want to start up a company and you've got a trade focus, great advice about starting small. But you want to get yourself surrounded by a lawyer before, and insurer, and an accountant. And those are the three pillars of any business that'll keep you about 80% safe. The rest is you. You're the dangerous one because you're going to get all the right advice. So being prepared and wanting to go out on your own, and you're skilled and you know what you're doing and you're comfortable, and you want to work your way towards bonding, because bonding is a very precious tool that a construction company has, and it's not easy to get, and it's very easy to lose. So once you get into one of those sectors, particularly one that requires bonding on a regular basis to bid, you want to have a strong, very strong position, good advice from your lawyers, good advice from your insurers, have all the proper insurance so that you're risk averse. And that's the advice I would give to somebody wanting to start up.
Well, this may be news to a lot of people. Insurance companies don't love paying out claims. They will. But if they're looking at to assess a risk, if your balance sheet isn't such for a bonding facility or anything along those lines, they won't look at it. So it's more those established companies. It's the ability to have different leverage points. But yeah, you're absolutely right from that standpoint.
And if you want to move out of your zone, if you're a general contractor that's done some small buildings and a structure, a bridge or something comes up and it's not in your wheelhouse, then you either decide that you're going to go into that sector by hiring an experienced person that's going to bring value to the company and allow you to grow your revenue. And that's what companies do. But the management part of all of that's got to get established, and it's just good business practice. Like I said, there's a lot of ways that you can get into some very serious trouble in this industry if you're not risk averse and careful reading the bid documents. The bid documents that we get these days, some are great, some are absolutely terrible, and they're cut and paste, and the rules are heavily weighted in the owner's hands, and the schedules that we're given are you can't meet those schedules. You can't. And so if you aren't brave and say no, this is not what's going to happen to us, because there are mitigating circumstances in a schedule that gets extended, and it's costs. As Derek said, you have a builder's risk that's supposed to be for 4 months and the project realistically takes 6. Well, then you've added another 20 grand to your project that you don't have in your bottom line. So
yeah, absolutely. Derek, there's another way that insurance companies are starting to protect themselves in a lot of ways that contractors should be aware of, especially as they're hiring subcontractors. Can you touch a little bit on subcontractor warranties and how these are popping up, especially with a lot of the domestic carriers, but how that's affecting contractors and the requirements and how that can invalidate a policy potentially?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So subcontractor warranties are not new, but we are starting to see them a little bit more. So what a subcontractor warranty does is it obligates the general contractor or the project owner to ensure that they have confirmation of insurance coverage in advance from the subcontractor. As Daryl alluded to, as you're doing your due diligence on your hired subs, that should be present. I think Jeffrey spoke to that as well. So for those general contractors that maybe their risk management practices, their internal risk management practices aren't that great, and they haven't followed up for the paperwork, they could find themselves and Jeffrey alluded to this as well. If your trade's not insured, you're going to be suing them. But if all of a sudden you find that you've negated your own insurance because you haven't met the warranty requirement, which is having that confirmation of insurance in advance, that can be problematic. From my world or from my company, Matthew, we don't see it very often having those subcontractor warranties, but in this challenging marketplace, they are out there.
And if someone has a subcontractor warranty on there and they haven't done their due diligence and found out that someone maybe should have had $5 million liability, what can that do to their primary?
It negates their coverage. It negates their coverage because they've committed to a warranty that says that they will ensure that their subcontractors have coverage. So for insurers, when we price out risk, we have our general contractor, and then we have all the subcontractors. Depending on the type of coverage that's taken out, you can significantly reduce your insurance costing if you have insured subcontractors. If an insurer puts forward a level of policy coverage, which we call a wrap-up, that it's the singular policy that'll respond, it prices a certain way. But if you have a commercial general liability and that affords protection coverage for the general contractor and the owner, but we have right of recourse or subrogation rights against an at-fault subcontractor, the policy will price accordingly for that reduced level of risk for an insurer.
So Jeff, to me, that goes back to your comment about the importance of a contract when you're getting started and making sure everything's dotted and T's crossed. But conscious of time, I want to take a look at 2022, Jeff, and courts are backed up, litigation's taking a long time. How do you see things progressing with the amount of litigation that's happening right now, and probably a continuation of this, and how long is it going to last?
Yeah, you raise a good point, and things have been in the court process system anyway, in the construction civil world, incredibly delayed, and I don't really see much of it improving in the next year, to be honest. Court resources have been diverted significantly towards criminal and family matters, and away from civil. Not to say you can't get before court within a few, 3, 4, 5, 6 months on a small issue if you need to. But I'm seeing a lot of clients who may have treated construction litigation as a cost of doing business in the past, just sort of expected that we're going to have a certain number of claims on this project or a certain amount at stake in litigation in any given financial year. Try to avoid this conflicts getting to that point in the first place, maybe more than before. So I can see that as we've all sort of been discussing the shortages of labor and the power that subcontract or trades and suppliers may have, I could see that balance tipping a little bit more, evening out a little bit in the next year, when you sort of get that correction in the market, maybe of those that aren't going to last long term, and then you have those that are kind of rising to the top. So I think that there's going to be a more even playing field. I'm not an expert in certain materials and which kinds of lumber and how that's going to pan out over the next few years, but generally speaking, I can see an evening of the field and hopefully a return to some more normal timelines and expectations for everybody.
Okay. Derek, same question to you. How do you see, I felt it a little bit through the last probably 6 months of the market coming back to a little bit more competitive. How does the industry avoid going into the pitfalls? And this may not be helpful to anyone, but hopefully from the prices, we don't get into the same issue that we did getting into the hard market, that the prices remain and sort of it's not another race to the bottom. How do you see the market opening up from availability of market, increased capacity? What does 2022 look like from an insurance perspective?
Yeah, from my vantage point, Matt, the principles of insurance, one of the primary principles is the law of large numbers. And what we've seen in this hard marketplace is that we have seen rates increase. We've seen return on investments for insurers starting to get to a point that's satisfactory for shareholders, or starting to get there. It's funny, just in advance of our call, I was looking at some of our insurance news and what people are speculating we're going to see for the year going forward. And I'm seeing a little bit of varying comments. Some feel that things are going to start to stabilize and get better early in the year next year, later next year. Some are saying 2023 before we start seeing a notable change. From my vantage point, what I'm seeing, again, sort of in my world, Eastern and Central Ontario, in the market space that I'm writing in, I believe we're going to start to see some stabilization. So the insurance industry going through this hard market, we're starting to see improvement on investment. That was across the board. That was in all industries, but the construction industry had this very unique, pressures and supply challenges. So what I see is I think rates that general carriers and contractors, general contractors, subtrades are seeing the kind of prices and premiums. I think they might be seeing moderate to lower rate increases. Availability of capacity, and to your point, Matt, in the past 6 months, I started to see some markets that I haven't seen in a couple of years. I'm starting to see frame construction. We didn't talk too much about that, but frame construction from an insurance standpoint is very, very challenging. Here in Ottawa, we recently had a very significant fire that a lot of us likely saw from our home, no matter where you were in the Ottawa area. So that capacity that's been difficult in recent years, I'm starting to see that coming back. So I believe 2022 for the construction industry, from the insurance standpoint, I think things are going to start to level off, start to stabilize, just because our industry is healthier than it's been in the past few years.
Daryl, that must be music to your ears for some pieces of it, but I'll give you sort of the final word as you look into 2022. purely from the construction side before we open it up to questions, if there are any from the floor. What do you see happening in 2022? The supply chain management, is that going to ease up? Hopefully, I know we've got a ton of boats in the ports. The labor side of things, is that even out? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think right now money is available. Banks are aggressively lending. The BDC is lending, and the interest rates are still very attractive. So we're seeing a lot of expansion, new plants, new buildings, right from chains right to individual doctors and dentists. So I'm quite excited about the market potential for 2022. I think there'll be lots of work for everybody, no question. The supply issue, the inflationary value of material that went up this year, I don't think we're going to have a big effect. I don't think it's going to come down much. I think it'll stabilize. And that's a good thing for risk assessment and bidding and delivery to work. We've also seen that if we bid a project and they say that they can take up to 6 months to award it, we're not bidding it because we've already been caught in that situation with, so that's why Jeffrey's getting so many phone calls, and that's what happens. But with interest rates low, money available for expansion, I think you're going to see a lot. The government's putting lots of money into schools and institutional buildings. What I'm really excited to see is what's going to happen with the office facility market going forward as people come back to work. I don't think we're going to lose that. I think it's just going to take a bit of time, but there will be significant changes and lots of opportunity for doing fit ups in government buildings, etc. So all in all, pretty good. The supply chain, I think we're going to struggle for the rest of 2022. I think you really got to be careful when you're bidding. You got to do your homework. You've got to have strong allies in your suppliers. Absolutely. Very, very strong allies in your suppliers because it still delays in material. There's just not enough manufacturing going on yet.
Well, thank you for that. I heard relationships, communication with clients. I heard being upfront and doing your due diligence through all three of you from your different perspectives. I want to open it up to the floor if there are any questions. I'm not seeing any yet, but maybe just what's Kathleen doing? Wanted to sort of just touch on that last piece there, Daryl. You mentioned about the work from home standpoint, and obviously with job sites being a little bit different, but are you seeing a shift back to the office for a lot of places?
Government's starting to go back at 20-25% capacity. We're seeing that. I did go to a seminar with Real Property like last year, and they were looking at developing hubs, East End, West End, and Central, that any government worker could go into. But I think this has been a good lesson in the value of collaboration within the office and how important it is. It's hard to mentor a young articling student unless they can stick their head into your door once or twice a day. Same on the insurance side. So that's one of the things that I'm hoping we'll get back to, because it's a very valuable piece of the puzzle to be able to go next door and ask the boss something,
And Derek, Jeff, before I move on to that, I'm gonna quiz you on something with regards to the vaccination piece. But Derek, before we go there, I saw last week with the head honchos at Intact were saying that they fully expect that the insurance industry is coming back to the office. I mean, we've seen a lot of brokers, a lot of companies sit back and say they're coming back, work from home, and that was a pandemic thing. But as I say, Intact, the largest insurance company in Canada, fully expects that it's going to be back in office. What do you see happening there? I know Aviva had shifted, and it was very much a proponent of the work from home.
Yeah, so we went to a hybrid office. Just speaking on behalf of my own employer, Aviva, we went to a hybrid, I'd say, a couple of years before the pandemic. I know some of the larger insurance carriers like Intact had a bit of a model like that just prior to the pandemic. What I'm hearing from my own executive is as we return to the office, now we're just very mindful of when we are going into the office that we're going in for meetings, and to Daryl's point that you get that collaboration, but work from home works. We found in very short order as we had 4,500 Aviva employees at home, we were still meeting our service demands, and actually, quite frankly, maybe a little bit ahead of where we were previously. So there's value in both. It's just maximizing the benefit of each. And again, having that touch point, having that in office, it's just making sure that it's of value and it's for the right thing. So I think in the insurance industry, I think we're going to see most general carriers like the Aviva, large corporations that are sort of halftime, just sort of maximizing the benefits of hybrid.
And Jeff, maybe I know this may not be right down your alley, but the Ontario government last week started their path to reopening. Maybe comment on the ability for a lot. I know the city of Ottawa has mandated double vaccination on job sites. Are you going to see more and more challenges to that? Are you seeing that people are just going to wait for that? Is that affecting the industry as a whole?
I don't think it's going to be necessarily that much different than the other workplace safety measures that have been implemented in the last year and a half. I remember mid-March 2020 getting phone calls from clients saying, should my guys be wearing masks on site? This is before I believe the Department of Health and the federal government even recommended the use of masks. So I don't think that it's going to be fundamentally dealt with much different than that. It's primarily an employment law question that unfortunately I am out of my depth, but if I could just add a bit of value maybe to this at the end, a bit of a different topic. In terms of working from home and virtually, the court system civilly is 99% virtual still. I have not been in a courtroom in a year and a half, and I've had dozens of matters before associate judges, before judges, various levels of courts. Examinations are occurring entirely virtually. Mediations are virtual. I have found that does lower the barrier to parties maybe trying alternative resolutions. In the past, maybe when you had to have half a dozen people traveling from Ottawa to Toronto for a mediation, maybe the cost just wasn't worth it, or even further than that. But now if everyone can log in from home, I'm seeing a lot of files resolve in that way that I don't think that opportunity would have been taken had we not been forced to. So while the court system is virtual, and I don't necessarily think that's a good thing for certain cases, it has opened up a lot of different opportunities to deal with files outside the courts.
Daryl, I'm with you. I think it's a huge value to be in the office and learn from your peers and the technical nature of this, and for us to be able to give the right advice to our clients. It's imperative that our team is together and being able to look at all the different industries. So that's a big piece. I wanted to thank you guys all for your time today. I know everyone's super busy as the world reopens. So thank you very much for connecting with us. Daryl, Jeff, Derek, thank you very much for being part of the Give Your Car Outlook for 2022. If anyone wants to connect with us offline, please feel free to do so. We'll absolutely be able to answer any questions that anyone might have. But thank you very much, everyone, for your time, and all the best in 2022. Can't believe I'm even saying that. It's not even Halloween yet. So
Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Likewise.
Thank you,
thanks,
Matt.
guys. Much appreciated.